I wasn't looking for a therapist. The campus wellness center felt like giving up. But October had worn me thin. Sleep came in fragments. My roommate suggested it during breakfast. She said it casually, like recommending a coffee shop. The building smelled of old carpet and fresh paint. Someone had tried to make it welcoming. Soft chairs, neutral walls, a receptionist who smiled too much. I filled out forms with questions I couldn't answer honestly. How often do you feel hopeless? Sometimes. How often do you think about death? I left that one blank. His office was on the 3rd floor, room 304. The hallway stretched longer than it should have. My shoes made no sound on the tile. When I knocked, his voice came through the door immediately, like he'd been waiting by it. He was younger than I expected, maybe 30, dark hair that looked like he'd run his fingers through it. His shirt was wrinkled in a way that seemed intentional. The office smelled like cedar and something else, something older, like pages left open too long. 2 chairs faced each other. Mine was closer to the window. His was positioned so I couldn't see his notebook clearly. The afternoon light came through dusty blinds. It made everything feel suspended. I sat down and he waited. I told him why I was there: sleep problems, stress, school. The usual things students say when they don't know how to explain the weight in their chest. He nodded and wrote nothing down. "Tell me about your dreams," he said. I hadn't planned to, but something about the way he asked made the words come easier. I told him about the recurring one, the forest where all the trees grew backwards, roots reaching toward a sky that never got dark, walking on paths that led nowhere but somehow felt familiar. He listened without interrupting. His pen stayed still. When I finished, he leaned back slightly. The chair made no sound. "The paths," he said. "Do they branch to the left or right?" I stopped. I'd never told anyone about the paths. I'd barely noticed them myself until he asked. But now I could see them clearly. They always branched left. Always. "Left," I said. He smiled, not pleased, not satisfied, just knowing. Like he'd already written down my answer before I'd spoken. The session ended with questions I couldn't answer. When did the dreams start? How often do they repeat? Do you remember anything else? I left feeling emptier than when I'd arrived, but also lighter, like I'd set something down without meaning to. Walking back across campus, I realized I hadn't told him about the figure in the dreams, the one who stood at the end of every path, the one who never moved but somehow watched everything. I'd forgotten about it completely until that moment. That night I couldn't sleep. Again. I sat at my desk with the journal I'd kept since freshman year, small leather-bound thing my mother gave me. I wrote when thoughts got too loud, short entries, nothing deep, just enough to quiet my mind. I wrote about the session. How strange it felt to talk about dreams. How he'd known about the paths. The pen moved easily across the page. The words came without thinking. When I finished, I felt tired enough to try sleeping. Morning came too early. My roommate was already gone, coffee cold on the counter. I found my journal there, next to her mug, open to a page I didn't remember. The ink matched my pen, blue ballpoint, slightly smudged where my hand would rest. The handwriting looked like mine. Looping letters, words that slanted right when I was tired. But I didn't remember writing any of it. The entry was dated 2 days ago, before I'd even made the appointment. It described the therapist's office in detail, the cedar smell, the way light came through the blinds, the position of the chairs, things I couldn't have known until yesterday. At the bottom, in handwriting that was definitely mine, were the words, "Tell him about the forest dream." I stared at the page until my eyes watered. I'd told him about that dream yesterday, but somehow I'd written about it before I'd even met him, before I'd even decided to go. I flipped through the journal, looking for other entries I didn't remember. Most pages were familiar: complaints about classes, grocery lists, phone numbers I'd copied down and forgotten. But scattered throughout were other entries, in my handwriting, about things that hadn't happened yet. One described a conversation with my best friend that we'd had last week, word for word. Another mentioned losing my ID card 3 days before it actually happened. A third talked about rain on a Tuesday. It had rained that Tuesday. I remembered because I'd forgotten my umbrella. I closed the journal and put it in my backpack. Maybe I was writing in my sleep. People did stranger things. Maybe the stress was making me forget things. But the handwriting was too neat for sleep writing, too deliberate. During my afternoon class, I opened the journal again. There was a new entry, written in my hand. I was sure it hadn't been there that morning. He knows about the watching. Don't mention the watching yet. My professor's voice became background noise. Students around me took notes on things that suddenly seemed unimportant. I read the entry again. The ink was still wet. I looked around the lecture hall. No one was watching me. Everyone faced forward, pens moving across notebooks, but I hadn't written anything. My pen was still capped. That evening, I placed the journal on my nightstand, closed it carefully, put a hair from my head between the pages so I'd know if someone opened it. When I woke up, the hair was gone. There was a new entry dated tomorrow. My second session was scheduled for Thursday afternoon. I arrived early and sat in the waiting room. The receptionist had been replaced by someone older, someone who didn't smile as much. She directed me upstairs without looking up from her computer. The hallway felt shorter this time. Room 304 appeared before I was ready for it. I knocked and entered without waiting for his voice. He was sitting in the same position. Same wrinkled shirt, different color, but same careful casualness. The afternoon light fell through the blinds at the same angle, like time had stopped between sessions. "How has your sleep been?" he asked. I told him it was the same. Fragmented, full of dreams I couldn't quite remember. I didn't mention the journal. Something told me not to, not yet. "Tell me about the figure," he said. I hadn't mentioned any figure, not in our first session, not to anyone, but I knew exactly what he meant. The one who stood at the end of the forest paths, the one who watched without moving. "What figure?" I said. That's when I heard it, a soft ticking sound, like a clock counting seconds. I looked around the office. The bookshelf behind him held several books, but no clock. The desk was empty except for his notebook and pen. The sound was coming from somewhere I couldn't see. "There's no figure," I said. The ticking got louder, more insistent, like it was measuring something important. He waited. His pen remained still. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted, like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. "The figure stands at the end of every path," I said finally. The ticking stopped. Complete silence returned to the room. like the sound had never existed. "Describe it," he said. I told him what I'd never told anyone, how the figure never moved, but somehow observed everything, how it seemed familiar, but wrong, like seeing your reflection in a broken mirror. The shape was human, but the proportions weren't quite right, taller than it should be, arms that hung too low. He wrote while I spoke. His pen moved quickly across the notebook. When I finished, he showed me the page. My words were already there. Everything I'd just said, written in his handwriting. But underneath, in pencil, were notes that made no sense. Times and dates. Numbers that didn't add up to anything. And at the bottom, in the same pencil, Session 3, reveal the room. "What does that mean?" I asked. "What does what mean?" I looked at the notebook again. The pencil marks were gone. Only my words remained. Written in ink that looked fresh, but felt old. I left the session feeling like I'd forgotten something important. Something that had been right in front of me. The feeling followed me across campus, into my dorm room, into my dreams that night. The figure was waiting at the end of the path, but this time it wasn't alone. This time someone was sitting behind it, in a chair that looked familiar, taking notes in a notebook I'd seen before. I called Maya that night, my best friend since freshman orientation, someone who knew me well enough to notice when things were wrong. I needed to tell someone what was happening. The journal entries, the therapist who knew things he shouldn't, the sounds that came and went, like breathing. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was warm and familiar. I started talking immediately about the sessions, the dreams, how nothing felt quite right anymore. She listened without interrupting, the way good friends do. "I think something's wrong with me," I said. That's when I heard my voice say something else. Something I wasn't thinking. Something I didn't mean to say. He's writing things down about me that haven't happened yet. The words came out in my voice, my tone, my rhythm, but I wasn't speaking them. They formed in my mouth without my permission, like someone else was using my vocal cords. May's response was strange. She didn't sound surprised, didn't ask what I meant. Her voice was calm, patient, like she'd been waiting for me to say exactly that. "How long has he been doing it?" she asked. I tried to answer, but my voice spoke again without me. "Since before I met him, maybe longer." This was getting worse. I was having a conversation I wasn't controlling, about things I'd never told her, things I'd barely admitted to myself. "What else does he know?" Maya asked. "Everything," my voice said. "Things I don't even know yet." We talked for another 10 minutes. Or rather, my voice talked while I listened. It told Maya about details I'd forgotten, about sessions I hadn't scheduled yet, about discoveries I hadn't made. Maya responded to everything like it was normal, like we'd had this conversation before. When the call ended, I felt hollow, like something had been removed from inside me. I checked my phone to see how long we'd talked. The call log showed Maya's name and number, but the duration said 0 minutes and 0 seconds. I called her back immediately. "Hey," she said. "What's up?" "We just talked," I said, "like 10 minutes ago." "No, we didn't. I've been studying all night. This is the first time my phone's rung." I described our conversation, every detail, every word my voice had said without me. Mia listened, but her tone grew confused, then concerned. "That doesn't sound like you," she said. "You don't talk like that, and you never mentioned seeing a therapist." I hadn't told her about the sessions. I'd meant to, but somehow forgot. Like the decision to keep it secret had been made for me. After we hung up, I sat on my bed trying to make sense of what had happened. I'd had a conversation I didn't remember having about things I'd never said out loud with my best friend who had no memory of it happening. I opened my journal to write about it. There was already an entry, dated tomorrow, in my handwriting. She won't remember the real conversation, only the second one, the safe one. But he heard both. Thursday's session ended differently. He seemed distracted, kept glancing at the bookshelf behind him. When our time was up, he stood quickly, too quickly, like he was late for something. "I'll be right back," he said. "Don't leave yet. I have something for you." He walked out and left the door open. I could hear his footsteps in the hallway, then silence. I waited 5 minutes, then 10. The office felt different without him in it, smaller. The cedar smell was stronger, mixed with something else, something chemical, like developing fluid or old ink. I stood up to leave but stopped. The bookshelf looked wrong. It had been flush against the wall during our sessions. Now it seemed tilted, pulled slightly away from the corner, like someone had moved it recently. I walked over to examine it. The books were old, psychology texts mostly, journals about consciousness and memory. One spine caught my attention: induced recollection and temporal displacement. I'd never heard of temporal displacement, but something about the words felt familiar. When I touched the shelf, it moved easily, too easily. It swung away from the wall like a door on hidden hinges. Behind it was a narrow opening, just wide enough for one person. I should have left then, should have pretended I'd never seen it. But something pulled me forward, like I was supposed to find it. Like this had been planned. The space behind the shelf was small, more of a closet than a room, but it held things that didn't belong in a therapist's office. A single chair faced a blank wall, the kind of chair you'd find in an interrogation room. Metal frame, vinyl cushions, no warmth or comfort. On the floor beside the chair was a tape recorder, the old-fashioned kind with large reels. It was running. The wheels turned slowly, silently. But when I knelt down to look closer, the tape was blank. No magnetic strip, just clear plastic spinning endlessly. The chair was warm, like someone had been sitting in it recently. The vinyl still held the impression of a body, my size, my weight. When I touched the back, it was damp with perspiration. I heard footsteps in the hallway, his footsteps, coming back. I slipped out of the hidden room and pushed the bookshelf back into place. It settled against the wall with a soft click. By the time he returned, I was sitting in my chair, hands folded, waiting. "Sorry about that," he said. "Phone call." He handed me a business card, his name and number. Nothing unusual about it except the texture. The paper felt old, like it had been printed years ago. The edges were worn soft. "In case you need to reach me," he said. I left the office feeling like I'd stolen something, like I'd seen something I wasn't supposed to see. The card felt heavy in my pocket. That night I tried calling the number. It went straight to voicemail. His voice was different on the recording, older, more tired. The message was simple: leave your name and the date. Nothing else. I hung up without leaving a message, but something told me he'd know I'd called anyway. The dreams changed after I found the room. They became layered. dreams within dreams, recursive loops of sleeping and waking that never quite resolved. I would dream I was in his office, sitting in my usual chair, telling him about my dreams. But in the dream, I was also behind the bookshelf, sitting in the metal chair, watching myself talk to him, listening to words I couldn't quite hear. Sometimes I was the one taking notes, writing things down in a notebook that felt familiar but looked different. The handwriting was mine, but the thoughts weren't. They belonged to someone else, someone who knew me better than I knew myself. The figure from the forest dreams appeared in these new dreams too, but now it stood behind the therapist, watching him the way he watched me. Its arms still hung too low, its proportions still wrong, but now I could see its face. It looked like me, an older version, tired, hollow, like it had been watching for a very long time. I would wake from these dreams gasping, heart racing, the taste of cedar in my mouth. My window would be open even though I always slept with it closed. Cold air would fill the room, and with it, that smell. Cedar and chemicals and something else. Something organic, like soil after rain. One night I woke to find someone sitting in my desk chair. In the darkness, I couldn't make out features, just a silhouette against the window. The shape was familiar, human but wrong, like the figure from my dreams. "Who's there?" I whispered. No answer. But the chair creaked, like someone shifting position, getting comfortable. I reached for the lamp beside my bed. When the light came on, the chair was empty, but it was still moving, rocking slightly, like someone had just stood up. My journal was open on the desk, a new entry in my handwriting, but I'd been asleep. "He knows you found the room. He's pleased. Tomorrow he'll show you what the chair is for." I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I sat on my bed watching the chair, waiting for it to move again. It never did, but I could feel something watching me, something patient, something that had all the time in the world. Morning came gray and cold. My roommate was gone early, class or work or somewhere that felt safer than here. I showered and dressed and tried to pretend everything was normal. But normal felt like a word in a language I used to know. I made coffee and checked my phone. No messages, no missed calls. But the business card was sitting on the counter. I'd left it in my jacket pocket. Now it was here, waiting. The number was different, same font, same layout, but the digits had changed, like the card was updating itself. I needed proof, something concrete, something that would make sense of what was happening to me. I started with my phone, hundreds of photos going back months, selfies, group shots, random pictures of food and sunsets and moments I'd wanted to remember. I scrolled through them all, looking for myself, looking for evidence that I existed the way I remembered existing. But something was wrong. Something was missing. In every photo where I should have appeared, there was empty space. Not blurred, not deleted, just absent. Like I'd never been there at all. Group photos with my friends showed everyone but me. Gaps in the composition where I should have been standing. Arms around shoulders that weren't there. My reflection was gone from mirrors in the background. My shadow missing from pictures taken in sunlight. Even my belongings looked wrong. Clothes hanging on nothing. Books floating open at the pages I'd been reading. I called Maya again. "Do you have any pictures of me?" I asked. "Of course. Tons. Why? Can you send me some?" She texted me a folder of photos from the last few months. pictures I remembered being in, moments we'd shared. But when I opened them, the same thing. Empty spaces where I should have been. My voice in videos, but no image. My laughter echoing from somewhere outside the frame. These are all empty, I told her. What do you mean, empty? You're in everyone. She described what she saw. Me smiling, me making faces at the camera, me sitting next to her on benches and couches and in coffee shops. She saw me, but I wasn't there. I took a new photo of myself, right there on the phone. The screen showed me clearly, but when I looked at the image afterward, it was just my dorm room, empty bed, unused space. Like I was invisible to cameras, but not to eyes. That afternoon, I walked around campus taking pictures of myself in windows, in mirrors, in any reflective surface I could find. Every image came back empty. The world was there, complete and detailed, but I wasn't part of it anymore. I found myself at the wellness center, not intentionally. My feet had carried me there while I was thinking about other things. Through the glass doors, I could see the reception desk, the hallway leading to the stairs, and in the reflection of the entrance, something impossible. There I was, clear as daylight, standing behind the therapist, in his office, even though I was outside the building, even though it was 3 hours before my appointment. I pressed my face against the glass. The reflection didn't change. I was still there, still standing behind him, watching him write in his notebook. But now I could see what he was writing. Names, dates, times, and sketches. Detailed drawings of faces that looked familiar, but wrong. One face looked like me, but older, tired, with eyes that had seen too much. Underneath it were notes in handwriting I recognized. My handwriting, but words I'd never written. Integration complete, ready for transfer. People began responding to things I hadn't said yet. Conversations that existed in my head, but never made it to my mouth. The barista at the campus coffee shop handed me my usual order before I'd spoken. A drink I'd been craving but never ordered. "Thanks," I said. "No problem. See you tomorrow at the same time." I hadn't planned to come back tomorrow. Hadn't even thought about it. But somehow she knew I would be there. At a specific time I hadn't decided on yet. My history professor answered questions I'd been forming in my mind, about topics we hadn't covered, about papers I was thinking of writing but hadn't proposed. She looked directly at me and addressed concerns I'd never voiced. "The source material you're worried about is available in the library," she said after class. "Third floor, section QR 401. I hadn't mentioned any source material, hadn't raised my hand, hadn't spoken at all. But she was right. I'd been wondering about primary sources for a paper I was considering, about a topic I'd only thought about that morning. My roommate started cooking my favorite meals without asking what I wanted. She'd have dinner ready when I walked in, exactly what I had been craving all day. Food I hadn't mentioned wanting. "How did you know?" I asked one evening. "Know what?" "That I wanted lasagna." She looked confused. "You asked me to make it this morning." I hadn't spoken to her that morning. I'd left before she woke up, but somehow she'd heard me ask. Heard a conversation that had only happened in my thoughts. Strangers on campus began nodding at me, acknowledging things I'd never said to them, responding to opinions I'd never shared. A girl from my sociology class thanked me for advice I'd never given, about a problem I didn't know she had. "Your suggestion really helped," she said. What suggestion? About talking to my advisor. You were right. It wasn't as scary as I thought. I'd never spoken to her before. Never heard about any problem with her advisor. But somehow she'd received advice from me. Advice that had worked. The only time people looked confused was when I actually spoke out loud. When I used my voice to say things I was thinking. Then they'd pause, look puzzled, like they were hearing an echo of something they'd already processed. I started an experiment. I would think something specific, something unusual, then wait to see if anyone responded. The results were immediate and consistent. People answered thoughts I kept private, ignored words I spoke aloud. My voice had become redundant. My thoughts were already being heard by everyone around me, everyone except me. One afternoon, I thought very clearly, I need help. Something is wrong with me. A stranger walking past stopped and turned around. Room 304, he said. He's waiting for you. The campus library became my refuge. Quiet spaces where thoughts felt safer, where I could sit without worrying about conversations I wasn't having. I'd been going there more often, hiding between stacks of books that smelled like dust and old paper. I was in the basement archive, looking for anything about temporal displacement. The phrase from the book in his office had stuck with me, like a splinter I couldn't remove. The basement held older materials, journals and publications from decades past. I heard voices coming from my corner study room. 2 students working on something together. Their conversation was casual but focused. The kind of collaboration that happens late in the semester, when projects become urgent. I moved closer to ask if they'd seen any materials about psychology or consciousness. But then I stopped. One of the voices was familiar, too familiar. It was mine, not similar to mine, not someone who sounded like me. It was my voice, my exact tone and rhythm, coming from someone else's mouth. I crept closer to the study room. Through the small window in the door, I could see 2 students hunched over an old audio player, the kind with large reels that turned slowly. They were transcribing something, writing down words as they listened. But the voice coming from the speakers was mine, clear and distinct, speaking words I'd never said, describing events I'd never experienced. The integration process began in October, my voice was saying. Subjects showed initial resistance, but adapted quickly to suggestion implantation. One student paused the recording. "This is fascinating," she said. "The documentation is so detailed." "Keep going," said the other. "We need all of it for the presentation." They resumed playback. My voice continued narrating something that sounded like a case study about someone who'd been carefully manipulated, whose memories had been slowly replaced, whose identity had been gradually transferred to someone else. By session 5, the subject began experiencing spontaneous recollection of implanted memories. Handwriting samples showed complete integration. Ready for final phase. I pushed open the door. Both students looked up, startled. "Where did you get that recording?" I asked. "The archive," one said. "It's part of a research collection from the psychology department. Really old stuff, from the 70s. But that's my voice." They looked at each other, then back at me. Their expressions were polite but confused. "This recording is from 1974, the other student said. "It's part of Dr. Harrison's research on consciousness transfer." I asked to see the equipment. The reel-to-reel player was vintage, heavy metal construction, definitely from decades past. The tape itself looked old, yellowed and brittle around the edges, but the voice was unmistakably mine, speaking about things that were happening to me now, in 1974, before I was born. The recording continued, my voice describing sessions with a therapist, dreams about backwards forests, a journal that wrote itself, all of it narrated in past tense, like it had already happened, like I was reading from a script of my own life. The final words on the tape made my blood stop moving. Subject integration complete. Dr. Harrison's consciousness successfully transferred to new host. Original identity archived for future reference. Project terminated. The tape ended with a soft click. The room became silent, except for the sound of my heart beating too fast. "Who is Dr. Harrison?" I asked. The students showed me a photograph clipped to the research folder. A man in his 30s, dark hair, wrinkled shirt, kind eyes that looked familiar. It was my therapist, 50 years younger, but definitely him. My final session was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I didn't want to go. Every instinct told me to stay away, to transfer to another school, to disappear completely. But something stronger than fear pulled me toward room 304. Like gravity, like inevitability. I arrived early and sat in the waiting room. The building felt different, quieter. Even the receptionist seemed subdued. When she directed me upstairs, her voice was barely a whisper. The hallway stretched longer than ever. Room 304 appeared at the end like a destination I'd been walking toward my entire life. I knocked once and entered without waiting. He was sitting in his usual position, same chair, same notebook, but everything else had changed. The bookshelf was gone. In its place was an opening that led to the hidden room. The metal chair was visible from where I sat, waiting. "I know what you are," I said. He looked up from his notebook and smiled, the same knowing expression he'd worn since our first session, like he'd been waiting for me to understand. "What am I?" he asked. "You're Dr. Harrison, from 1974. You've been doing this for 50 years. He nodded slowly. "Longer than that. This body is just the most recent. Before this, I was Dr. Chen. Before that, Dr. Rodriguez. Different names, different faces, same consciousness. I wanted to run. Every muscle in my body screamed at me to leave, but I couldn't move, like I was watching this happen to someone else. Why me?" I asked. "You're the right age, the right psychological profile, and you came to me willingly. That makes the transfer easier." He turned his notebook around so I could see it. The page was covered with my handwriting, but not words I remembered thinking. Thoughts I was having right now. Fears and questions forming in my mind and appearing instantly on the paper. How is that possible? I thought. The words appeared on the page as I thought them, in my handwriting, faster than any human could write. "I've been inside your mind for weeks," he said, "learning your patterns, your voice, your memories. Soon I won't need this body anymore." He gestured to himself, to the face I had trusted, the eyes that had seemed so kind. "The transfer is almost complete. You can feel it, can't you? The way your voice speaks without you, the way your thoughts echo in other people's minds. You're becoming a recording, a memory of someone who used to exist." I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't support me. I was becoming lighter, less substantial, like smoke beginning to dissipate. "The chair," he said, nodding toward the hidden room. It's for you, where you'll watch the rest of your life being lived by someone else. I found myself walking toward the opening, not by choice. My feet moved without my permission, one step, then another, toward the metal chair that was still warm from the last person who'd sat in it. How many, I managed to ask. Dozens, over the decades. Each one sits and watches. Each one remembers what it was like to be human. I reached the chair and turned around. From this angle, I could see his office clearly, the 2 chairs where we'd sat, the notebook where my thoughts appeared, and behind the therapist, shapes I hadn't noticed before. Translucent figures standing silently, watching. All of them looked like people who'd trusted him, people who'd sought help and found something else entirely. You'll understand eventually, he said. Time moves differently here. What feels like forever is only a moment. What feels like a moment lasts forever. I sat in the chair because I had no choice. The metal was warm, perfectly molded to my body, like it had been waiting for me specifically. He closed the notebook and placed it on his desk. Then he walked to his chair and sat down. When he looked up, his face was different, younger. The features were shifting, becoming more familiar. My face, my expressions, my eyes looking back at me from his body. She'll try to leave, he said in my voice, but she's already been written. The session was over, but I was still sitting in the metal chair, still watching, still remembering what it felt like to be myself. The recording equipment beside me hummed softly, preserving everything, documenting the transfer. Outside the hidden room, someone new would walk into the hallway, someone wearing my face, living my life, making my choices, speaking with my voice to friends who would never know the difference. And I would sit here, in the warmth of the chair, watching time move like honey, remembering dreams about backwards forests, about paths that always branched left, about figures that watched without moving. The watching had always been the point. Someone had to remember what was lost. Someone had to preserve what was taken, even if that someone was no longer quite human. Even if that someone was just a memory learning to forget itself.